we'll get that. All right, so let's look at our weekly schedule. Today is Saturday the 30th. We're at home doing case study data gathering, and you'll have a PowerPoint and reflection due. Next week, you're at home and you're starting the AIRS book, Super Crunchers. I hope some of you have already gotten started on that. You'll be at home the following week, and we'll Zoom that Saturday morning and do our case study giving feedback, which is the last of our case studies. The Easter break week, and then our last weekend together will be Saturday and Sunday, the 27th and 28th, and we'll talk more about that when we come online again. We may do something a little bit different for that one. And then you'll have your discussion boards due the following week, and then we're through. All right. All right, so that's it. Is anybody doing, I haven't seen any responses come through. Is anybody doing any deep dive into SALKIND, into the quantitative work, using the data sets, doing any of those things? I told you that they'd be optional. Once you got the basics, if you wanted to dive in, I would encourage you to go in and look and at some of those things. And I get excited when people want to do that. Of course, I get those respondents tests and grade the essay questions on them, or the fill in the blanks. So, but that's up to you. You've done what you're supposed to do. Any questions on the weekly schedule? Everybody knows where we are and what we're doing on it. All right. I had a document in your case study materials from Chapter 5 on conducting effective interviews. I hope you kept this in mind and looked at the different kinds and how to ask good questions. I told you I did a year of qualitative work with the Gallup Corporation to become a perceiver, which is different than an interviewer. An interviewer just asks questions and gathers data. A perceiver tries to read the body language, the facial expressions, the demeanor of the person that goes along. And I've told you that's much more difficult because you have to focus on the person rather than scripting the interview. For that reason, you really need to record interviews so that you can go back. Sometimes you miss things, and it allows you can jot down a couple of notes as you go, but it allows you to actually watch the subject of your interviews, which I think sometimes is just as valuable in the qualitative realm as the actual answers themselves. And so I had this in here to help guide you in your case study. All right, let me get out of that. And so this week we did data gathering, exercise 3, and all the instructions were here. And the discussion questions that you were to fill out in your PowerPoint presentation. You had 3 different cases that you could choose from. Case 3, case 4, and case 5. Which case did you pick?
Case 5.
Case 5. Dixie weaving. All right. Who's going to do the PowerPoint this morning and get started? Let's get rolling.
Jessica.
Okay. I guess I'll be doing it.
Tag, you're it.
All right. So I just need to share, right?
Just as soon as I make you the host.
Sorry. Jumping the gun a little bit.
No,
okay.
You're good. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. X out. Stop my video.
Can y'all see that?
We can. Excellent.
Let me get y'all out of my way. All right.
Okay, we'll start with facts of the case. So the place we're looking at, Dixie Weaving Incorporated, and they have 1,500 non-union employees. They run a 24-hour operation with two 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, and their two major manufacturing processes are winding and weaving. And some key people here, we have Bill Johnson, who is Corporate Human Resources Manager at Dixie Weaving. Joe and N are called in to be consultants, and they've actually worked with the plant before on some previous matters. They are professors of industrial organizational psychology at a local university. And we have Mike Payne, he is plant manager and subject matter expert for winding and weaving. And when the consultants go in and begin asking questions, so Mike's main concern is he's the bottom line guy. He's concerned with meeting production goals and making sure that what's going on at Dixie Weaving is not affecting the output of other plants. And next, the consultants come across Hector and Sam. Hector and Sam are concerned about the day-to-day operations of the plant. They express their concerns regarding the training of new employees, safety standards at the plant. They also acknowledge that they're finding it difficult to meet the departmental quotas, and also express some concern regarding language barriers, and that there's a possibility of maybe some population changes occurring within the local area. And Bubba and TJ Spratt are senior operators. Their concerns are new employees are not adequately trained. They feel like they're having to babysit the new employees, as well as still having to meet their quotas for production. So Steve Troutman and Cindy Lee are the lead training coordinators. Cindy kind of becomes a little defensive when the consultants are meeting with everybody, especially after Bubba and TJ express their concerns, and she says that the plant has a rigorous 12-week training program, and she feels that if anybody else within this group of people has a better idea of how they could do their job, then they should let them know. And as they begin to tour the plant, Joe and Ed come across Harriet. She's a new hire. She's been working there for about 6 weeks, and they find her with Jimmy James, who Bill described as, you know, cream of the crop for the company, but her current duty that she's doing is she's doing some burning off of extra fibers that are on some of the spools. And the consultants asked Bill, well, is that what she's going to do her whole shift? And he's like, well, I'm really not exactly sure why she's doing that, because typically we only do that at the end of the shift, getting ready to clean up. So our central problem, looking at inadequate training, it's inconsistent and inadequate, and in some instances, maybe it's not exactly what the company needs at the current moment for the current conditions. So there's a possibility that they actually need to look at revamping and maybe totally changing the way that they are training. There's also lack of communication, especially between the different departments at the plant. And then our central problem leads into our secondary, where we're looking at some low morale within the plant. High turnover rate is close to 40%. The working conditions are poor, very few breaks. The plant is very hot. Lack of training for new employees, but also lack of consistent training or follow-up training for current employees, inconsistent job expectations, poor morale, and safety concerns. Quite a few people throughout the case study made mention of the pancake incident that recently happened before the consultants come in. So the quote is given, it's impossible for the organization to keep well-trained personnel on the manufacturing monitoring floor at all times. And some questions we have, what were past retention efforts? What are current retention efforts? And maybe why those weren't effective.
All right, so we gathered all that data and we put ourselves as the consultants and decided to do interviews. We took the observations and the plans from the consultants that went to Dixie Weaving, and that helped us decide who we were going to interview and how we were going to formulate those questions. So we, in our cohort, decided different roles. So some of us were interviewers, some of us were interviewees, and then some of us were note takers. We did this interview over Zoom. We played this out over Zoom. And then we each reflected on the different roles we had. So that's how the rest of the PowerPoint is laid out, is our interviews. So the interview topics we decided on based on the plan and observations within Dixie Weaving were hiring practices. So we wanted to make sure we picked people or interviewed across everybody there about how they were hired. Training was a big concern. So we wanted to make sure we got a lot of information on training. So we based some of our questions on that. Experiences on the plant floor. Supervision, again, was a big thing that we wanted questions about, so we could dive into that. And then communication also was important. So interview number 1, we decided to do 2 interviews to reflect here. Of course, as real consultants, we would have interviewed a lot more. But we decided we needed to interview an employee. We need to get their perspective. So I was the interviewer for that one. Lori was the interviewee, so she played the role of the employee. And then Jay, Bruce, and David were our note takers for that one. These are the questions that we came up with we decided on Harriet, who was a newer employee. So again, we mentioned that we wanted some information about training. So these, some of these questions related to that, about what kind of training she received, how long was the training, again, how her typical day was, how many hours she worked, breaks she got, a clear understanding of her role. We felt like that was important to have some information about. Supervision, like I said, was important. So we wanted to get some feedback on that. Who their supervisor was, how those supervisors communicated with them. Did they even think that their supervisor knew what they did? And then finally, we wanted to know something that they felt like needed to be fixed. So then we meet Harriet here.
Okay, so I played the role of Harriet, who's a new employee. She's been there for 6 weeks. So can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So when asked about the training, Harriet knew that it was supposed to be 12 weeks, but she was on the floor after 6 weeks. She did not have a specific mentor, nothing official, but she's working with Jimmy James. So I think it's interesting. She's kind of like, well, I guess you could call him my mentor or my trainer. And then you get the clue of, I don't think I will make it here long. I do not feel competent. So she's giving that answer as the questions about training. Then asked how long she works and how many breaks. 12-hour shift. They didn't go into this detail in the case study. So some of this we are, answering with what we think. Work 12-hour shift, 15-minute breaks every 3 to 5 hours. The breaks are not at set times. No one really seems to know when we take breaks. And then there's a 30-minute lunch break. And I think part of that is there seems to be, even with the supervisors and the plant manager walking through, a general sense of not a lot of structure as far as what's going on. Like, why is she working over here and what's going here? Do people know what's going on? So I think that's probably the same thing with the breaks. Is it set time, or I'm just kind of waiting to find out what happens? So describe your typical day. I've been doing what's called burn off, which Jay talked about a little while ago, which is getting the leftover yarn off the spools, which is with a very hot iron. I do not think people like doing the burn off, so they have the newbies doing it. And the word newbies was in the case study, talking about the people that just started. And I thought that was interesting too, because they're saying they can't keep qualified people, that there's such a huge turnover rate of 40%, but you've got your so-called newbie doing a job that no one else wants to do. And when the plant manager walked through with the consultants, they were like, oh, why is this what she normally does? That plant manager said, I don't know why she's doing that. That's something that we usually leave to the end of the day. Well, here we have someone who's worked there 6 weeks, not done with training, but doing a job that other people don't want to do. So Harriet says, I work until Jimmy James tells me what else to do. I don't really have a set schedule of duties.
Did I go too fast?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Do you have a clear understanding of your job and role expectations? No. Wow. No, I don't have a clear understanding of my role. I work until I'm told what to do next. And this would have been a good time to have a follow-up question on that, to get some more, to kind of dive deeper and get some more information. How well does your direct supervisor communicate with you? The supervisors are not around. They sit in their air-conditioned office. And air-conditioned should be bold and underlined because it's 90 degrees in the plant. And that's probably a point of contention with the workers that the supervisors walk through. But they're not in there for 12 hours a day in that hot environment. They have never spoken to me directly. That's a pretty strong statement that as a consultant, that needs to be followed up on. Do you feel like your supervisors are aware of what's going on at your job station? No, not at all. And naming one thing, one process or aspect of your job that could be improved in how? Training. Harriet's on the floor. She shouldn't be there yet. Harriet's 52, Hispanic female with a high school education. All right, now we're going to the next interview, and that is...
Okay, that would be me. So at this particular interview here, I was the consultant, the interviewer, and David acted as Sam Smith, who was the actual supervisor for the weaving area, and then Jay, Lori, and Jessica acted as note takers. So what we wanted to do here is gather some questions about the management style, the different types of how they felt about the plant, how they felt about the job, how they felt about some of the workers that came through. Sam had expressed some things in during the tour about the communication barrier that existed within the plant there. What you typically see, particularly when there's a high turnover in this particular case here, is you see that we got to get product out the door. Production becomes a top priority. Safety is not a priority. Quality is not a priority. People is really not a priority. So we want to really dive in and deal with some questions that will kind of highlight some of those themes. So we asked questions about the mission. How do you feel about the mission of the company? Looking at a typical work day to see how much time he really spent on the floor with his people, or did he spend time in the office? Talking about the training program, was there concern? As we know, Harriet was on the floor in 6 weeks, so obviously they weren't meeting the 12-week demand for the training program. And then just wanting to know if he understood the role of his people and also their expectations. And then we asked a little bit about the working conditions there as well, to get his take on the working conditions, and then just some profile information.
So moving into the questions themselves for Sam Smith, the floor production supervisor, about the mission of the company. And Sam's answer was that Dixie Weaving leads by producing top quality goods at low cost with ensuring the highest customer satisfaction, to be innovative, responsible, and profitable in the global textile industry, and added that's what the book on my office desk says. So just kind of a straight out, just off the reading off the paper kind of answer. And a typical day, and I tried to hearken back on my days of, I worked one summer in a production plant and saw how things worked. So in a typical day, we talked in the case about 12-hour shifts. So started at a 12-hour shift and focused on human resources and to see if somebody is showing up that day. And if somebody's absent, trying to figure out how they're going to be replaced on the production floor, and focusing that I, as Sam, would do some of the work to assist because I have the knowledge base to do so. And on good days, I get to train. And on other days, I end up just on the floor filling in the holes where other people don't show up. Because in the case they mentioned there's a 40% absentee rate, 40% turnover rate. And I try to emphasize that HR says it's a 12-week training program, but I've needed to train folks on the floor because of the 40% rate. You just can't find enough people to do the job. And so that's the main focus is really on the idea that it's emergency status, it's day by day, and it's checking with HR on a daily basis to see who's actually going to show up and who might be new candidates to bring in, because there's just not enough people to do the work. And then regarding to the question that Bruce asked about, describe Dixie's 12-week onboarding training program. Do you feel employees are adequately trained to operate the equipment in 12 weeks? Sam just responded, there's a 12-week training, but we need people to start lately so badly that part of the training program has been for me looking over their shoulder on the floor during daily production. Maybe that can change if we hire enough people. Another question that was asked to Sam was, do you have a clear understanding of your role and job expectations? And the response was, I think I understand my role after working here 20 years. I had a good ex-supervisor, so I saw for a long time what he would do as a floor supervisor. We've got some issues from things like communication, and you can't supervise somebody who's not here to supervise. And the focus was also in the answer about safety after the pancake incident. And then the next question that Sam was asked, describe working conditions, hours worked, the number of breaks you get on the job. And the response, as a floor supervisor, I work 12-hour shifts. And just like we do each shift, it's not easy work. I'm supposed to get a 15-minute break each 3 hours, but I almost never do get a break because somebody's got an emergency. And there can be long, hot days in the plant. And Sam was profiled as being 38, white, male, and high school education.
Lori, is that you?
Let me get off mute. Okay, so the debriefing now is the remainder of our slides, what we thought about this process. So we reflect on the experience of designing the interview questions, and those that were doing the interviews came up with those questions. They were designed based on the objectives of the consultants. So looking back at the entire case and the issues, the central problem and the secondary problem, and trying to have the people that were interviewed answer some questions that would lead to some thoughts on action plan. And the decision was to do open-ended questions. So as far as the interviewees, how did they feel about the experience? So Harriet says here is, yes, she felt at ease, and the interviewer was kind, compassionate, was interested. So I was Harriet, Jessica was the consultant interviewing me, was very calm and asking questions. I think some more detailed follow-up questions would have allowed for increased in-depth analysis. That was an example I gave when I was going over the questions. And I think if we were doing this in real life, this is kind of our practice, what we did would have been the mock interview or practice. We would have learned some stuff like we're talking about now before going and interviewing the real people. Face-to-face as compared to Zoom interview may yield different responses, because we met, I think, 3 different times on Zoom for this one. It was a little more involved than our past case studies. So with that, we all know each other well, and we all can kind of know what's going on. I think if you were really doing this with people you did not know, and it talks about in our book that more and more interviews are being done online, I think there's some barriers there for doing interviews over Zoom. Just like Dr. Lamb was talking about, what was the word? The perceiver. Can you get that information online versus in person? You see someone's head. You don't have the total body language.
Perfect example.
Yeah, that's something interesting, and I think we experienced with our Zoom session. David?
And then the other part for Sam, I think Sam's answer would be something like, I was at ease in the interview process. The interviewer was direct and to the point, and the interview knew what he was looking for information, but he considered my answers before moving to the next question. But I think in reality, Sam would have a lot of really apprehension behind the scenes, because it's really questions about process and procedure and what's going on in the plant. And I think that would be a front face answer, but behind the scenes, I think he would actually be nervous.
Yeah. All right, let me ask a question right here. All right, Lori brings up an excellent point here, that you get different results live, face-to-face, than you do phone interview or even a video interview with Zoom. Which does that speak to, reliability or validity?
Validity, wouldn't it?
I'm thinking reliability is consistency. Are you getting the same answers every time?
All right. Okay. Initially, you're both right. Initially, it's reliability because you're not being consistent. And then it's validity in that your answers, if you don't have reliability, can you have validity in the end? On the back end, you have no validity.
Okay. Excellent.
On the front end, always remember they're a couplet. They come together. If you're not reliable, and the issue here is reliability, don't produce the same results. These two different methodologies, face-to-face and Zoom, do not produce the same results. So they're not reliable. And so that makes our findings then not valid. Excellent. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay. All right, so with the interviewer, I was interviewer number 1, and I interviewed Lori. I don't think we went in depth about the purpose of the interview, but I feel like in the real world, when we were doing it, I think that would have been mentioned to everyone that was being interviewed. Why are we doing this? So I feel like they would have been informed. I think overall the questions elicited appropriate responses. I think we had some of the same questions, so I think we could compare answers there, get some good data. You know, a typical work day for an employee, a typical work day for a supervisor. You know, number of breaks for an employee, number of breaks for a supervisor. So I think some of those things we would have gotten some really good responses from. Bruce?
And as interviewer number 2, I agree. At first, I was just a little intimidated with Sam because of some of the comments Sam had made during the tour. And as we got started, I kind of felt a little more comfortable conducting the interview. I did not explain the purpose of the interview either. I just kind of jumped right into the questions, and I just failed to do that. And then I can't see the bottom. Questions about jobs I felt like was much more effective because we can gather information and common themes there. Profile may have been a little more ineffective for me. I'm not sure if it will work. If I was interviewing Hector as well, I might can get some data on profile and look at how it compares to Sam and Hector.
So as the role of the note taker, did you accurately capture the interview in your notes? What would you do differently next time? So I think overall the message was captured. However, I found myself trying to write down everything. So probably a need to develop a personal shorthand
Yes.
or a device that's more efficient, in, like a note-taking system, abbreviations, maybe some acronyms. So I found there were a lot of kind of detailed summaries of responses, but maybe more of a shift to using bulleted some keywords or key phrases. I also missed some of the nonverbal communication cues because my head was down and writing. So no notes on observations or impressions. Not really a balance between the note-taking process and then the active listening process. And listening would lead yourself, kind of like looking at the person and listening would lead yourself to be able to pick up on some of those more nonverbal communication cues. I didn't print off a copy of the interview questions to record the answers on. They were actually written in a notebook. So I think next time would actually have a copy of the questions with space to be able to write the answers. Also, probably we should have come up with a rubric of some things that maybe keywords or phrases that we should have been looking for.
And that's it.
Okay. Excellent job. It's really hard to interview and perceive. You can hear, but again, it's best to record and do shorthand note taking, and the major themes will kind of jump out at you. Go back to the beginning of your presentation and let me give you some random thoughts here.
How far you want me to go?
Just go back to the very beginning.
Okay, this is it.
And then, all right. This is slide 23.
Oh, y'all can't see what I'm saying?
Nope.
This happened last time.
Well, that's okay. What I wanted to point out is nowhere in the mission vision, nowhere did I hear anything in this company about people. The people that work there. I mean, they didn't even disguise. You hear some companies, our people are first, and those kinds of things, and we care about our employees. They really don't, but at least they perpetrate a pretense that we care about our employees and what they do. I read something recently. I don't know if it was attributed to David Geffen from Virgin Atlantic, but it said, you should train your employees well enough that they can go work somewhere else, but treat them well enough that they won't want to. But the first part of that is, the training piece. Our people are our most important. This is a microcosm of the real textile industry in the South. So, brief history here. 1945, the war is over. World War II is over. We set about, even though we're in conflict in Korea, early the next decade in the 50s, but we set about to rebuild Japan. And one of the things that we do is we set about to rebuild their industry, their manufacturing industry, to bring them back. We kind of bombed them into the Stone Age. And so, our better selves said we better help these folks to come back. We didn't do that with Germany after we bombed them out into oblivion in World War I. And so they came back in World War II. And so to prevent World War III, we said we better go in and rebuild Japan. When my dad left Korea in 53, I think it was, he went to Japan. And that was part of the effort that he was involved in. He was an estimator, project estimator. Basically, he was in the Army. And he would go to all these places that had been destroyed or damaged during World War II and estimate what it would take to repair and do those kinds of things. And so we spent a lot of time in Japan as a country, as the military, trying to reestablish their industries. Now, out of that came Theory Z, which is a business model theory. But one of the things that happened is the military came in and did this. The military is a no-nonsense organization. Not sure that their role should be to reestablish business in manufacturing, because military exists to blow stuff up and kill people. They're not really concerned with the employees too much. It's kind of the nature of the business. So we set Japan back up, and they became highly competitive. And part of that was on the backs of their employees. They didn't really care about them. They were expendable. Well, in the same time in our country, our employment, especially in the South where we had textiles, we had been about the people. We had mill hills and houses for our employees. We had company stores. We had doctors. We had all these things where we cared about our people. And all of a sudden, we had to start competing in an industry with people in Asia, in the Pacific Rim, Japan, and other countries that didn't care. They didn't have any laws on child labor, how many hours you worked, or all those kinds of things. And so I guess the last company store in North Carolina closed in '65. And we went to a model where we didn't care about the people. It was a turnover model. When I first worked in Rutherford County schools a long time ago, we had a little mill on every campus, the 3 high schools, where we trained people in high school, and most of them dropped out after the 10th grade and went to work right in the mill. They did the training at the high school. That was before the basic ed plan said you couldn't do that. But we pretty much planned that a good number of our students were only going to go through the 10th grade. As soon as they got to be 16 years of age, we had them trained up to go to the mill, and they became creel hands and weavers and spinners. And that's the way it went until the basic ed plan came out in '83, '84 that said you can't do that anymore. Every kid's got to get basic education. And, of course, the textile industry was already in decline because of the very things that you saw in this. This is a textile industry. They were running a situation or organizational model where the people didn't matter. We'll just get more. They intentionally had a high turnover rate. You don't have to pay wages. You keep younger, healthier employees that don't need health coverage or insurance, don't have sick days. They were just grist for the mill. And so that's kind of the backdrop for this case. This is a microcosm of what happened to textiles in this country, and especially in this region. Now, the central problem is they don't care about their people. If they cared about them, they'd train them, they'd induct them. They wouldn't have them burning off ends all day long, those kinds of things. And so the bigger question now, y'all did a great job on your interviewing and outlining the case. The next step is as a consultant, what do you do in a case like this? I mean, these people want to know how to fix it. Let's shift out of case study mode into consultant mode now. How do you fix it? What do you tell these people? What is your plan going forward as the consultant to try to help these people?
Well, they need to get more employees so that they can provide that consistent training. And I don't know if they could do a hiring, like a job fair type thing where they hire, have a big interview time where they come and interview a bunch of people and try to hire. I don't know. That's right.
That speaks to the Giesenslaw brothers. I guess they would be called bluegrass now, or roots music. The song that they had, "My Pocket's Got a Hole in It." My outgo is more than my wherewithal. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many you get. You're going to have to get more. But how do you keep them? I mean, if you're always losing them, that's kind of a fool's errand. If your pocket's got a hole in it, you can't ever keep what you got. You're always needing more. And we know the efficiency of an organization drops dramatically with undertrained or new people all the time. It's just like the school business. That became a crisis, and it is a crisis in public K-12 education. Is when 80% of your people don't make it to the 5th year, and you're constantly turning over. How do you expect to get performance in your classroom? You got to figure out a way to keep who you got more than just I draw out a life cycle of the teacher, and teachers aren't very effective coming out of college. It takes about 4 or 5 years for them to get up to speed and be really good, and that's part of and that's part of just a normal maturation process. Unfortunately, not too many 22 or 23-year-olds are very mature now. And it takes a while, and they all dream of going back to graduate school or something else coming along or making it in some other industry. And a lot of it's not ability, it's dedication. Getting them to put the yoke on and understand that this is going to be my career. Somebody crushed into my truck this week, and I had to take it over to the local body shop. And the young man who was going to guide my truck through the process of getting it fixed said something to me about being in education, and I said, yeah, I retired and I work with Gardner Webb in preparation and training. Now he said, yeah, his girlfriend is 27 years old and she's had 5 years of teaching and she wants to get out and be a consultant. And I thought, after 5 years, she's still not put the yoke on and decided to go to work. But unfortunately, that's normal. I mean, we have kids that live at home until they're 35 now. 18-year-old today is about like a 12-year-old from my era, and a 25-year-old is about like a 15-year-old from my era. I hate to say that, but now I was grown by the time I was 18. I understood that it was time to be a grown person and move on. We don't get that anymore. And so this is not some speech about how things were better in the past. They were just different in the past than they are now. These are things that you have to understand organizationally, that you've got to get people and train them, and you've got to work to keep them and move them through maturity with applications of task and relationship behaviors. But neophytes, new people to the organization, or newbies as they called them, they'll always be newbies until they leave. The way that they're not newbies anymore is that with training and expertise. So again, in that vein, what would you suggest to this organization as their consultant?
I'm wondering about the 12-hour shift. There are several things in the case study that we talked about and then came to mind. One was it's so hot in there, and we asked, was there anything to do about that? Bruce said no, that's how it is. You can't do anything about the heat. Do they have to work 12 hours? The other thing is they were talking about a language barrier, and I can't remember which person, if it was the floor supervisor or the plant manager, was kind of frustrated that people weren't all speaking English. Well, that frustration should be get someone in there that can speak the language and not have people being numbers, but people being people. Like you were saying, if the central problem is people, and they cannot speak the language, help them out with that with someone who can be a translator.
Yeah. Well, the first question I would ask these people as their consultant is where do people fit in your vision and mission for this organization?
Yes.
Do they fit in? Now, if they don't fit in, then you going back to Jess's solution, you're going to have to add a division that's just out recruiting and bringing in new people all the time. That's going to be a constant. That's going to be an everyday thing, is hunting new people.
Well, we have a company in Cleveland County, Clearwater Paper. It's up on Washington Road, and they just went through another big expansion. But when they started in about 2010, they moved to the area. It's a paper mill company.
Mm-hmm.
The plant manager at that time, Vince Reese, he realized that he had to change the culture of the people in Cleveland County,
Mm-hmm.
because they were coming from the textile industries
Mm-hmm.
and other type industries. And what he did, which was a genius on his part, he invested in the people. I mean, he trained people. I think there's a philosophy too that says that if I train them, then they'll leave. And then the flip to that is if I don't train them, then they'll stay, So you're going to have untrained people that's going to stay in your plant. So he actually trained his people. I mean, he went through a lot of training at the college, invested in his people.
Mm-hmm.
They're on 12-hour shifts. The conditions are hot in the summer, cool in the winter, but the plant is immaculate. I mean, you can
Mhm.
eat off the floor. When you go in this paper mill plant, you would believe how it looks. They have automation, robots in there, but his whole philosophy was, I want to train my people and invest in my people. And
Right.
he had a low turnover as a result of that.
Yeah. So that's what you have to ask first. Where do people fit in your vision or mission? And if the answer is they don't, I'm not sure that you can. I mean, that's why textiles went out, is because the answer when it came down to crunch time, the answer is we don't care about people. We only care about profit. Many of those companies, their corporate offices were not in the region. They were just sending the profits back, and they really didn't care about the people. Bruce just made my point, and excellent point, Bruce. The first thing you have to find from the leadership in that plant is where do people fit in, and understanding. I've read that 1,000 times. If you train people, they might leave, but if you don't train them, they're probably going to stay, and that's a bad thing. But this is a people problem. The core problem here is people and lack of training, turnover, those kinds of things. And it's clear through the interviews and through the observations that you've done, your qualitative work, that the problem here is turnover, and there's a reason behind that. And so you're going to have a critical conversation with the people in charge in terms of where do people fit in. And if people don't fit in, they're not going to be successful. And that's nothing that you can do as a consultant is going to help these people to become successful, because we've seen what happened. There are people offshore who are willing to do this and don't care about those things. Now, if you want to do a quality job, you're going to have to invest in time and people and training, and you're going to have to do fidelity checks as well. You're going to have to get out of your air-conditioned office and go check and make sure that people are getting the training as prescribed. That's one of the biggest problems that we have in organizations, whether educational or whether they're profit, nonprofit, is do the people get what's intended? Or, you can design the best training program in the world, but if you don't go and make sure that it's being implemented as designed, it's not going to happen. And that goes back to the supervisors again. It goes back to the leadership. Okay, you paid some industrial or manufacturing expert to design your training processes. You've got a manual. Do you make sure that that's being implemented with fidelity? You can't ask the people who are doing the training, what are they going to tell you? It's the best training in the world. We're doing exactly what we're supposed to. It's that bunch of knuckleheads you're giving me that's causing the problem.
But Dr. Lamb, also too, I was going to add that the plant manager, if this is a patronage organization, I mean, he needs to probably go, because he's not concerned about the people. And that will be your first point that you make, is that you need to change leadership. But in the textile world, they were all connected. You had the plant managers that were connected, so they weren't willing to get rid of those plant managers.
They became exactly right, Bruce. They became patronage organizations, and they were only looking after themselves. They weren't looking after their employees. They weren't looking. That's exactly right. So I said you got to start with the leadership. Where do people fit in? And if they don't fit in, then your recommendation is you got to have new leadership. You can't fix that part of it. That was my point. Nothing that we can do will fix that point. If people don't factor in, if you don't care and people don't factor in, that's not fixable. Then your recommendation is we need new leadership here that understands that this is a people business and that we need people to be successful in this business. And if we don't, if we're not interested in people and they're not going out, they're sitting in their air-conditioned offices, and they're not, that displays a lack of interest in the people there, then Bruce is exactly right. You're going to have to change leadership. This is not fixable in the current form.
Dr. Lamb, I'll add, you mentioned about the mission. When I made up the mission, I did look at other websites of textile companies here in the U.S.
Yes.
And modeled the mission I wrote based off of theirs. So there's in the U.S. right now, we're not mentioning essentially a focus on employees either.
That's correct. And that's why the business has left them.
Yeah, but I would think in this situation too, from at least an incentive, people are incentivized by money. There should at least been some type of incentive to at least, get 50 cents or a dollar more if you stay on with us for a certain number of months. If we as a plant don't have any incidents of safety, everybody gets a bonus. But there's no planning, there's no safety plan, there's no communication. The other thing that I think might be beneficial, since they said there's such a large percentage of Hispanics out of this, and I've read of this in the United States, of essentially like split crews, that you could have one crew where the supervisor is speaking Spanish and everybody on the workforce in that shift is speaking Spanish. And in that way, everybody has a better communication, as opposed to, in this case, we hear the supervisors can't communicate with their employees, and a large percentage of the employees are Hispanic.
Yeah. Well, we know how to fix that, but that goes back to a lack of focus on our employees. They're just grist for the mill. They're just there to be used. Lowest common denominator, back to the Theory Z model. In the Pacific Rim, those people that didn't care about their employees, they just used them up, and we thought the way to compete with them was to do the same thing. And so again, you're going to have to change leadership if you're going to be successful. But there's a lot of things that you could do. I mean, you can do, raise the hourly wages as the longer that you're there. You can, all those safety things you see at plants, the ISO, so many days from the last act. I mean, there's a lot of, but see, you have to care about people. They have to be somewhere in your vision or mission statement, and not just lip service, but actually that our people are our best asset, kind of thing. There was some company that advertised a long time that our people are our best asset. And you have to not just pay lip service to that, but you have to do that every day. And people know that, the conditions working here might be tough, long days and hot, but at least it's a safe place, and they care about me, me and my family and my health long term. But when profit becomes the only motive, a lot of times you lose the profit because you forget about the people. But as a consultant, I think Bruce hit the nail on the head here. You got to go talk with the leadership, and if you don't see any evidence that they care about the workers or understand the role of the workers in this plant, even though it's a manufacturing environment, your recommendation has to be to the ownership of this is that you got to have new leadership here. And to David's point, there's a lot of things that if you cared about people, you could do. I like the language, having Hispanic supervisors along with Hispanic workers, but more than likely in a patronage environment, the supervisors are somebody's relative. They got the job not because they could communicate or because they had any skills, but because they were somebody's relative. And so that's how they got into the supervisory role. But this is a good case study that brings about a lot of thought as a consultant, not just the technical part of being an interviewer and designing interviews and perceiving and listening. This is a bigger case study than we've done before, but it has a lot of implications for you as a consultant and as a leader of an organization about how important the people in the organization are, what their role is, where do they fit in, profit versus people, understanding as what your limitations are as a consultant. I mean, I love what Bruce said. I'm going back to that. I'm being redundant. I mean, there are times when you have to understand this is not fixable. I don't care how good you are as a consultant. Sometimes things just aren't fixable. Under the current leadership in this plant, this is not fixable. They could have done, I mean, they knew the right things to do already. They're not willing to do them. They're not interested in the people in the plant. As I read through this again last night, I've done this case study several times, but as I read through it again last night, that's kind of the central theme to me is we don't care about these people. That's everything you read in this is we don't care about the people. Before I forget, we don't care about you people. And they make that very clear with their attitudes and behavior, that people are just expendable. And when people are expendable, they will leave. That you guaranteed that. You set this organization up to be dysfunctional. It can't be any other way. And we can nibble around the edges and change here and do, but this is set up to be a irrational bureaucracy, a dysfunctional organization. The leadership has ensured that. The only way really to fix this is to change the leadership. Period. You can dance around it all you want to, but it's not going to change. Because you think about 736, the class you just came out of, strategic planning and change management, unfreezing, moving, and refreezing. If you think about that process, you understand that this is not fixable. You got to change your old habits, move, and do new things. They've blamed the victim here. They blame the workers rather than themselves for what's going on. What's their likelihood of changing them, of unfreezing their practices and moving them to new practices and then making sure those practices stay instituted? Just slim and none. And Slim just caught the last bus out of town. So that'd be none. This is an excellent case study to look at dysfunctional organizations and why they're dysfunctional. Because they don't care about their people in the end. And what you find, I'm moving to the benediction now. What you find in patronage organizations is they only care about certain people, friends and relatives. Everybody else is just grist for the mill. So in patronage organizations where you're providing jobs to friends and relatives, it's the worst of all worlds. You're not focused on product or quality. You're not focused on what the client system gets. You're not focused on the needs of the workers. You're only focused on the needs of the friends and family deal, which probably made up the bulk of the supervisors in this plant. The day-to-day, the rank and file worker, you're not interested in them at all. They're just a commodity like yarn. Get more of it. And that's, in the end, when we talk about patronage organizations, therein lies the problem. We don't care about the client system. We don't care about the output. We're not really interested in performance. We're there to provide jobs for a few people. And eventually, this is what happens in all patronage organizations is you get weighted down by incompetence and low expectations of the people who are there. And again, Bruce is right. The only solution is you're gonna have to change leadership, and that's what most patronage organizations face eventually is that we got to change leaders. They're not going to change no matter how dire it gets. They're still not going to change because this is what we do. This is who we are. This is what we do. In a rational bureaucracy, when things start going bad, you would change. But by definition, a patronage organization is an irrational bureaucracy. And no matter how bad it gets, financially or clients or whatever, no matter how bad it gets, we're not going to change willingly. Just not going to happen. And so you need to be able to figure out when you go into these places, are they a professional organization? Are they a client? Are they a client experience organization? Are they a patronage organization? What kind of organization are they? And that, in many ways, is going to lead you into your consultancy there as to what your recommendations are going to be. This is a pure patronage organization. The only thing that's going to fix this is new leadership. Everything else is just nibbling around the edges. All right, questions for me or comments that you have on this case? Again, I would encourage you, we'll get together again.
I'll give you back, share.
Reclaim host here. All right, share. Screen. Share. All right, we're back here. We're back here. Again, today is March 30th. Next week, you're at home. We're together again in 2 weeks on April 13th, Saturday, for our last case study, giving feedback. Now, I want you to look not just at the giving feedback, but I want you to look at the data in that case. It's qualitative, but I want you to look at the data in that case and think big picture now. We're shifting from the role. You're about midway through this program. You're shifting from the role of student to professional now, trying to get you to look more, at the system as being the leader, decisions that you would make. I want you to look specifically at that qualitative data and be thinking about what decisions you would make based on that qualitative data. And I'll just leave it at that. And so when we have the kind of the after presentation reflection, I'm going to expect you to give me some solutions or what you think next steps ought to be when we get that. And then 2 weeks after that, 4 weeks from today, we'll be back on main campus. And we'll think about how that format's going to play out for that weekend. We'll be looking at that. And then 2 weeks after that, we're done. All right. Anybody, anything for the good of the group before we close out today? All right. I appreciate you all being with me today. I've enjoyed it. You did an excellent job going through the intended activities for today. I hope that you've learned something. Back to one of the biggest takeaways I hope from today is that you've learned is it's really hard to interview and perceive at the same time. That note taking and head down gets in the way. That you really need to be a perceiver and not just an interviewer. And you need to set yourself up for success. Face-to-face is best. Record them. Take notes. Jade's point, shorthand, so that you can watch and listen actively as you work through these. Those impressions that you get are just as important and qualitative as the answers that you get. All right. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Come by and see me. Bye-bye.
Thank you.